One of the most important comparative metrics and data points to look at when it comes to the numbers for Trump versus Harris is what happened with Trump versus Biden 4 years ago. It's not just about which party is outperforming the other when it comes to early voting. It's the delta. It's what is the change from 2020 in that early vote to 2024. And there's some really odd stuff going on, like right here. And this is something that we talked about on a member stream recently. With such a massive underperformance of Democrat early ballots compared to 2020 in places like Pennsylvania, you got to wonder, where did all those 2020 Democrat voters go? Because you see, in 2020, Democrats had about 1.1 million more votes that had been cast in the early voting than did Republicans. But as of right now, the early voting in Pennsylvania shows that about the same number of Republicans turned out in 24 as they did in 2020. But the gap between Republican and Democrat votes shrank precipitously from 1.1 million votes advantage in 2020 to only about 400,000 in 2024. Where did these other 700,000 voters go? And are they actually going to show up on Election Day?
Renegade Online.
Guys, remember this map? This is from 2020, right? We all remember this. Yeah. Okay. And what we want to talk about tonight are the numbers, are the math. We know historically that, especially with Donald J. Trump, there has always seemed to have been some level of underperformance in the polling for his side of things. Let's put it that. I mean, his supporters, right? Their ability to get out to the polls. It always seems to get understated by a few percentage points. And 2020, I think, was a good example of this. You know, we had polls going in that showed, Pennsylvania, Biden won by about a point, 1.2 points, 80,000 votes, basically. And there were suggestions going in that night that Biden was several points ahead of that. And I think we saw the same thing in 2016. So what is it with these polls out there that we can try to identify where the issues are? Well, we've got somebody here tonight that I think is probably the best person to answer these questions. And so glad that he is able to join us from Rasmussen Reports. And you guys have seen us quote his stuff before, especially with the Disney polling. We have done many videos on this. These were some of the audience's favorite videos. Well, the guy who's responsible for a lot of this is joining us now. Please help me welcome the great Mark Mitchell from Rasmussen. Welcome aboard, sir.
Really happy to be here. What a crowd. Really
Mark.
appreciate talking to you. I'll tell you, I don't think I've said this, but I can't stand politics, and I can't wait to get away from it. And one of the things that I watch as my catharsis is people crapping on the entertainment industry. I love it. I love you guys' videos. I watch them all the time. It's really great to be here.
Welcome to your happy place.
Yeah, and that was a pleasant surprise to find out that you were a fan of Pro and myself, and I was like, well, let's get him on here. Let's talk about the election. Let's talk about the numbers here. You guys have been really busy. Y'all put out a ton of stuff in the last few days. I'm sure you probably have had no sleep, and hopefully you're going to be getting a little bit of sleep between now and Tuesday. I don't know. Do you guys have any more polls coming out between now and then, or y'all pretty much wrapping it up?
No, that's it. Yesterday I thought, well, maybe we might go into the field for Iowa, but to be honest with you, with how many people have voted already, the polls are starting to be kind of useless. Everybody that's putting final results out now, New York Times, Nate Cohn came out and said it. They're seeing all kinds of weird signals, and that's because the real people that take the polls that went and voted and are now just waiting for the results, they don't really register anymore. It's just the people that are trying to push narrative. So, that's great. It gives me a little bit of time to rest up for Election Day. And I don't know. It's going to be big either way.
Yeah, I think so. And that's what I kind of want to discuss with you here is, so let's kind of go back from a high level view, and then we can kind of zero into some individual battleground states or whatnot. What is the difference between the way you guys are doing your polling models versus not everybody else, but a lot of others out there? Because obviously there's disparity in these numbers, both at the national level, on the state by state level, and you see wild swings. One person's going to say, well, Harris is up +2. Another person says it's Trump +4, and it goes all over the place. So what is it that you guys are trying to do differently?
I think really the biggest difference is that we're independent. We don't report up to a major mainstream media organization. And if we're wrong, then we cease to exist because we're subscription and advertising revenue. And to be honest with you, we've gotten a moniker as being a far-right pollster. And we definitely do poll on issues that others refuse to touch. We think it's important and has nothing to do with politics. We think we're journalists and we have a duty to report on things that matter to people. But then also we got that moniker for just the unholy crime of saying that, hey, Donald Trump has a chance in this election back in 2016. And of course, our polling showed that Hillary Clinton was going to win the national popular vote, but everybody was way far left. And then the same thing happened in 2020. And believe it or not, our polls on average showed that Biden was up 5, 6, 7 points. We even had a Biden +12 in the last couple of weeks. But then again, our final call was Biden +1. And this time, I'll tell you, we're not that far right of everybody. But what we didn't do is that once Kamala Harris entered the race, everybody just took a massive swing to the left. It was incredible. You had Reuters Ipsos go from Trump +1 to Harris +6 in a matter of 6 weeks. And I'm doing the numbers. We started doing daily numbers. We were the only ones doing them back then in August and September. And the race was like Trump +3, Trump +2 the entire time, like week after week. So I started calling these people out for the liars that they were. And sure enough, they all came back. So when it comes down to methodology, our methodology's not that different. In fact, we're waiting to try and be, right down the center, and our polls are kind of where everybody else is. But what we'll come out and say is that the polls look better for Trump than they have at any point in the time in the last 8 years. Whereas everybody else that discusses the race is saying things like, oh, it's on a knife's edge or it's too close to call. Donald Trump's winning the national popular vote in the Real Clear Politics aggregate. He's massively favored to win this, and nobody can bring themselves to talk about it. Instead, they latch on to all this ridiculous stuff like the Ann Seltzer poll, which is clearly a garbage outlier. It just clearly is. You could talk about how she's the gold standard and whatever, but there's outliers. It happens.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think is fascinating. And to your point, how you said, all these Harris comes out and all of a sudden, boom, it was like, oh, there's massive surge of popularity for Kamala Harris. And all of a sudden it's +6 Harris on the national scale. And I, like you, I'm scratching my head wondering, okay, wait a minute. What is the marked difference for the average voter between the enthusiasm, or what is the gap of enthusiasm between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that would suggest such a hard swing? And to your point, here you go, because this is the kind of stuff. Now, this is at Fox News today. This is just a headline I grabbed. Trump, Harris, neck and neck in battleground states with under 48 hours. So, I mean, to your point, things went wildly all over the place one way or the other. And then all of a sudden we came back down to earth, and everybody, right as we lead in, oh, everything's tight. It's razor thin margins. But what you said a moment ago, I think, is what's most interesting to me, and that is the fact that you have Donald Trump, who is actually up in the Real Clear Politics average at a national level. That doesn't usually happen with the Republican candidate, does it?
No. And what they'll tell you is, oh, look at 2012, look at Romney. All the polls said he was favored and his support didn't show up. But I mean, it's really hard to compare Romney's enthusiasm to Trump's enthusiasm, who got more votes than any Republican candidate in history, and maybe more votes than any candidate in history. Really. And even without looking at the swing state polling, there's some basic math people can do. And I might get yelled at for a simple analysis like this. But in 2016, the national popular vote margin was about 2 points for Hillary Clinton. But on average, the battleground states went 1 point to Trump. So the national popular vote was 3 points to the left of the battlegrounds. In 2020, the national popular vote was like 4.5 points to the battlegrounds. So if that kind of thing holds up and Donald Trump's doing better than he's ever done in the national popular vote, like, he's going to do a lot better in the battlegrounds than he did in 2016, just mathematically speaking. And I'll tell you, my states are kind of tight. I have Michigan a toss up. I got Wisconsin, Pennsylvania up 2, I think. Maybe Wisconsin was 3. North Carolina was, I think, Georgia like 3. I mean, it's like at the margin of error, but it really comes down to, I think my state polls are too left. And the reason I say that is there's been a lot of focus this time out. And listen, it's really tough to poll right now in this environment because we have a political realignment going on. If you just poll Republicans and conservative Republicans and conservative Trump supporting Republicans, you could still have a ton of those people who don't like Trump. That's the wild thing about it. And so it's really hard to make sure you get a representative sample of the country when there's that many differences. So what we found is that our polls were overflowing with Trump supporters even after we waited for party. And we wanted to be very clear to find just the people that like changed their minds from Biden to Trump and make sure that we were honed in on that signal. And so we started waiting to the recalled vote, which means we asked people who they voted for in 2020. And we make sure that we force the sample to match that. And that way, we're not overrepresenting Trump supporters. And it actually was a really big sandbag in our polls for Trump. I'd have Trump up 6 in the national popular vote if we didn't do that. But the reason I did it is because there were major pollsters like the New York Times who were not. And all these state polls that they were putting out had way massive oversamples of Biden supporters. And so we've stuck with that. And it was the right call, I think, for this cycle. But what it doesn't let you do is it isn't helping you be sensitive to the signals like, wow, all of a sudden urban minority voters are just not there. All of a sudden, rural voters, first-time voters, low propensity voters that never turn out are breaking for Trump in big ways. And those are things that I always thought could happen, but I'm not like baking that into my weightings at all. So I really do think the signs in the swing states right now, all the early vote signals, and the fact that in a lot of these states, the Democrats don't have anywhere near the firewalls they did, and the fact that you're seeing depressed turnout in urban areas, but you could really see Trump run away with it in a way that even my polling doesn't reflect.
Mark, when you look at your polls and you look at this early vote and the fact that Republicans are overperforming anything they've ever done in the early vote, is it your estimation that this is cannibalizing the Republican turnout on Election Day, or do you think that on Election Day we'll see the same sort of ratios we've seen in the past, which then would suggest there could be a red wave that did not manifest in 2022?
I just did 12 state polls, and we asked, who are you going to vote for, Harris or Trump? And then we also asked, how do you plan to vote? And people can go get these crosstabs if they want. They're not behind paywalls. People who say they're going to vote in person on Election Day, I just have Arizona up.
Mark,
Trump
real quick,
wins.
I'm sorry. If you want to, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. We can look at
just
some
go
numbers.
ahead and do the present thing there in the backstage of StreamYard at the bottom, and that way you can navigate your own data as you go through it.
Oh, geez, let's try not to make this too boring here. Do y'all got?
This is what people come here for. Let's talk about the crosstabs. Here we go.
Yeah. So if people don't know what crosstabs are, this is a top line number. These are total likely voters. This is in the most recent poll I did at Arizona. It's about, I think it was like 900 respondents. And here's the question, the 2024 head-to-head matchup, and we have Trump winning 48-46 in Arizona. But then you could see, all right, well, he's winning 6 points among men, but down 2 points among women right here. And you could see, wow, Trump's not doing as well with Hispanic voters as he is nationally in Arizona. He happens to be doing well. Only 22% of the black vote, but he's winning by 10 points among white voters. So whatever, there's so many demographics you could look at. That's why polling is powerful. Campaigns or people who are trying to put advertising together can use all this to target folks and understand. But this is the super important one here. Thinking of the presidential election, how do you plan to vote this year? And Harris, people are saying, oh, well, like she's going to massively win the vote by mail. Well, according to these numbers, and maybe there's a margin of error, and maybe I'm not tuned to exactly get this signal, but she only wins the vote by mail by 10 points, and she's losing early in person by 30. And Trump's going to win by 8 points among people who show up on Election Day. Now, maybe there's some up and down here, and maybe Trump was winning much more among people who showed up in election day in 2020. But the point is that if Democrats have to dig themselves out of a hole, they're not going to do it with people who are showing up leaning 8 points to Trump.
Well, and that was going to be my question, right? Because that's the question a lot of people have currently. And that is, okay, right now, and the one that I've talked about is because I think it's a great example for people to look at, because everybody wants to look at Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is important, but it's not the end-all be-all, but it is definitely up there for sure, right? But the thing with Pennsylvania, my understanding is when you look back to this same point in time, back in 2020, when you had all the early voting in, Democrats had a 1.1 to 1.2 million ballot advantage in the early voting, if memory serves. That advantage this time around is roughly 400,000. That's a significant fall off. That is a fall off of 6, 7, 800,000 fewer ballots at the same time as an advantage that Democrats have versus 2020. And in 2020, Biden only took Pennsylvania by about 80,000 votes. So and that's one of the questions is that I know a lot of people ask, and not just to Pennsylvania, but is there any data that you see, and you probably just answered the question here, but are we going to see a slowdown of Republicans on Election Day? Because that people think, well, okay, we're cannibalizing the Election Day vote with early voting, which I suspect may be true in some cases. But what kind of, I don't know if you can decipher what sort of impact that's going to have on Election Day.
Yeah, again, it's really hard for me to reconcile it all back because I haven't really been looking for all of these new registration advantage. I'm using basically the same weights as 2020. I didn't go out on a limb and say, oh, wow, Trump's really been out there registering people, so I'm going to bake that into my weights. And I know that the people that they've been prioritizing for their early turnout have all been people who haven't voted for or maybe independents or may be new registrants. Mm-hmm. But according to this, Trump's going to win 11% among people who are in person on Election Day. And a lot of those new registrants are probably going to show up on Election Day too. So again, the Republicans almost dug themselves out of a 1.1 million vote hole.
Yeah.
4 years ago. The signs are not that Republican turnout is down. And I'm hearing things like the vote in Philadelphia is depressed. The vote in the Pittsburgh area is depressed. And it just looks
traditionally
really bad.
Democrat areas, right?
Yeah. And again, like this is, I think, interesting signals that you can find in my crosstabs, but also like what I'm doing this for is to show that, look, Trump's winning Pennsylvania by 2. We also had him up by 3 a couple weeks ago. I trust that poll a little bit more than this one. And ultimately what it comes down to too is if you just write off the state polling and look at my national polling, we had Biden up about 6 points in the polls 4 years ago. I thought we were too left because he came out at 4.5. So I actually removed 2 points of Democrat weighting. I went to D+2, although Gallup says we're in an R+1 to 3 environment right now, but whatever. I went to D+2, but then I also added the recall vote, which is about a 3-point Trump sandbag. So we really went from Biden +6 to Biden +7. And now we have Trump up 2 or 3 points in the national popular vote. So my point is, in 4 years, our national numbers went to the right, like 8 to 10 points. Like those people live in states. They live everywhere. They live in Iowa. They don't live, just in every state except Iowa, right?
Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.